Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome to today's second upload. Before we jump into it, a couple quick links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman, Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment and share the video. Why? Well, because all these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. They definitely do matter, and they are appreciated. And with that, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to today's second upload, shall we? Long before Brad had been on Vic Cundiff's channel and shared his just terrifying experience, long before he came to my channel to share more, he had an experience that was truly a mind-blowing event. And I want to share that with you right now. Brad to share his Bigfoot encounters with us. Brad, how are you?
Good. It's nice to be with you, Jeff. Want to say hello to your wonderful audience. Hello, everybody. This is something a little different.
Yes, it is a little different. And I talked a little bit about it. I don't know all of the details. I know a little bit of the first story. But the second story, I pretty much said I don't want to know about it until you tell it in full on the channel. So I'm going to turn the mic over to you. And I guess we're going to start off with your first experience ever.
Yeah, this takes place. First of all, I should say that you do know a little bit about the second encounter. I gave you some highlights, but I was a bit of a pussy when that happened. As you know, that was the only time you've ever heard me freak out, because the photos were taken off my phone. Yeah. And I even took my phone to the Apple store, and they said, no, there's no photos on here, right? So I wigged out on that, and I gave you some highlights of the story, but I didn't really tell you what really happened. Right. That was in September of last year that happened. But I'm going to give you the first. I've had two Bigfoot encounters in my life. The first one happened this was in California, where I used to live. I had a guy that worked for me named Andrew, and he used to get on me all the time about wanting to go up to Mount Shasta to hike, because he knew I was a hiker. I've always been a hiker, and he had this trail up there that he liked to go. The problem was that it was about a 7-hour drive from where we lived in Southern California, because Shasta, for those of your audience who don't know, that's up in Northern California. So one day he came to me on a Friday and said, hey, I'm going to be going up to Shasta the following weekend. Would I like to come? And at first, as you and I talked about privately, I was a little apprehensive. We won't get into that on the show, because we have some listeners who might take offense to that. But I was a little apprehensive because let's just say I had never been alone with him before. Let's leave it at that. Right. And I was a little apprehensive, and the old camping joke. Anybody that's old enough will know what I'm talking about, the camping joke, right? Yep. So anyway, he says to me, like, hey, I know a really cool place up there. There's a trail up there that you can hike, and you can do the entire hike in maybe 3 or 4 hours. And I said, well, do we have to go all the way up to Shasta to do that? I mean, there's plenty of places around here if you want to hike. Actually, Southern California's got a lot of great places to hike, and the weather, of course, is perfect. And he's like, yeah, but there's no forest. He goes, this is like real, true forest. And this is before, just for your audiences, some of your audience will know me and my background, some won't. But, I'm from Southern California, and there isn't forest there. There are some, when you go up into the mountains, Baldy and Big Bear, there's some, a small amount of forest. But generally speaking, there's not a lot of forest in Southern California. So he wanted to go where there was real forest. And I'm like, we got all these places we can go. And he's like, yeah, trust me, Brad. And he said that this is something different. So I thought about it. I went home, talked to my wife about it. And I was still married at the time. And she said, you don't really know that he'd been working for me for maybe 6 months. And there was rumors about this guy, and so I was a little apprehensive. If Jeff wants to elaborate on that at some point later, he can. But I was a little apprehensive. But, he assured me after I talked to my wife about it, she's like, well, if you want to go. And he had said what we would do is go up there and spend one night. We would drive up there, spend one night, then the following day go on the hike and then drive home. So, we'd only spend one night in a hotel.
Right.
We weren't even going to camp. This wasn't like that. I'm not much of a camper, as your audience will know by now. I'm not much of a camper or an outdoorsman, So I talked with my wife about it, and she said, well, she knew Andrew because he'd come by the house before when I paid him. And she said, whatever, if you want to do it. I was like, okay. I told her my apprehension, but she's like, oh, come on. So the following Monday, when I went back to work, he came in to pick up a check. He came into the office. He was a loan officer for me, and so I told him, hey, all right, man, when do you want to leave? When did you want to do this? And he's like, well, I was thinking we can take Friday off, and then just be back Saturday night, and we'll leave Friday, get up there, and then get up early Saturday, do the hike, and then just drive back. And I said, okay, yeah, that sounds good. So a week goes on, and then Friday, it was Thursday, he comes by the house, and I say, hey, he was a gun guy too, but not like me, but he was definitely into guns. And I brought it up because I don't think he was planning on taking a gun. So I said, hey, I'm not, I hope you're okay with this, but I'm not going up there without a gun. I'm not going into the forest without a gun. And this is way before Dogman. This is circa 2006, 2007, in that neighborhood. I would have been late 30s at this point, maybe, late 30s. And he was a few years younger than me, so to give some perspective. And he says, what? Well, he goes, I don't care if you want to take a gun. I said, well, I would advise you to take one too. And the funny thing was, it turns out that the following morning when we left from my house, I had a holster that I had I was putting in my backpack when he walked in, and he goes, hey, is that a 629? He's talking about a Smith & Wesson, which is a 44 Magnum. I had a 5-inch. It's called a 629 Classic for the gun nuts out there. And he had the very same gun, which I thought was hilarious, right? At the time. He says, is that a classic? I said, yeah, it's a classic. And we go out to his car, and he shows me, he even had a similar holster to mine, right? And I was like, all right, cool. But that was the only guns either one of us had. No other. This was before I started carrying with my concealed carry. I didn't have that, so this was strictly the only guns he and I had. But we both did have 44 Magnums, just so the audience understands. Because even back then, I knew I'd seen too many movies about things, and I wasn't going to go into the forest or even close to the forest unarmed. So the Friday morning, we get our stuff together and got a bag, and we put it in the car, and he's driving. We get up to, I think we left the house at about maybe 7:30 or 8, somewhere in that neighborhood. We got up there about 3:34, And we decided, because we weren't going to go on the hike until the next morning, so we ended up going to a bar. I don't even remember the name of the town, but it was a little town, and I think there was only one bar, maybe two bars in the whole town. But we ended up going to this bar, and I remember that there were peanuts on the floor. And we go in there, we have some drinks, and finally I just came out and asked him. I said, so are you married? And he's like, no. And I said, oh, okay. You got a girlfriend, right? And he looks at me and he goes, yeah, I got a girlfriend. And I was like, okay. That's all I'll say about that. But anyway, that's kind of what I was worried about. So we have a couple of drinks. We go back. We ended up getting back to the hotel room probably fairly early, maybe 10 o'clock. And I made sure that we had two beds.
I'm gonna cut you off. I got to do it. So the old joke, and I've said it on the channel in the live streams, there's that camping joke when you're in Boy Scouts. Hey, you want to go camping? Or, hey, if me and you went camping and you woke up the next day and your butt was sore, would you tell anyone? And greasy, would you tell anyone? And then, of course, you're going to say no. And then
you say you want to go camping, right? Well, that's what I was. Jeff did it. Jeff said that, I didn't.
So for the Brad's thinking that's the whole time, because obviously this guy has kind of like a whatever, and so that's the whole gist of that beginning, where my smirk was coming from. So all right,
I was worried that perhaps he wanted more than a hike from me. Let's leave it at that. How about that? Okay, that's what I was worried about, and that's why I was pressing him about. And then he finally looked at me, and I think he got the drift. And he's like, "Yeah, dude, I got a girlfriend." I was like, "Okay." So now more to the story. So the following morning, we wake up, we leave the hotel. We pack. We knew we weren't going to be going back to the hotel. We were going to drive straight back from the hike, because it's a 7-hour drive from where we lived. So we put everything into the trunk, and it was probably maybe from the hotel to where we were, it was, I don't know, maybe 30-minute drive. You got to remember, this is either 17 or 18 years ago. So this isn't I'm doing this because when I told Jeff about this, he wanted this story to be told on the channel. So I'm telling it, but I don't remember a lot of the specifics because this was so long ago now. So much has happened in my life since then. But so we get to the trailhead. It's like there was a bunch of cars parked there, and this is up at Mount Shasta. Or I say Mount Shasta. This wasn't like on the actual mount where all that weird stuff goes on. Right. This was like a few miles from that. Okay, I wasn't really up on Shasta. It's let's just say it's in the vicinity of that, but we weren't. We didn't see any aliens or spaceships going into I know there's been stories about all that kind of stuff on your show as well.
Yeah.
Or those people that live inside of it that are,
deep underground military bases.
Yeah. No, we weren't close enough for any of that. This was probably, if I had to guess, we were between 3 and 5 miles away from that, but it was forest. Okay. And there's a trail up there. I don't remember the name, but it's anybody who's familiar with Shasta will know what I'm talking about. You park your car there, you walk a little ways, and then you get to this area and there's a sign up and it's a trail, and you're actually walking in the forest, right? It's a trail, but you're in the middle of a forest, right? It's a well-traveled trail. It wasn't concrete or asphalt at the time, it was dirt. So we get there and we probably, I don't know, we must have gotten there at about 8 o'clock in the morning, maybe between 8 and 8:30, strap on our firearms. And that's another thing in California. It's not like it is where I live now in Arizona, where everybody carries. It's not a big deal. California, you have to, the park rangers will, they won't enforce it if you're carrying a sidearm, because they know people don't want to go into the deep forest unarmed. So I know that about them because I've talked to a ranger before. A lot of times, as long as you're cool about it, they won't mess with you. But we didn't see any rangers, so it wasn't a big deal. So, and there was only, if I remember right, there was just 2 or 3 cars in the parking lot where we parked. So we decided we were just going to strap up right there. We both put our guns on. We had backpacks, had food and water. Not a lot of food, just enough for the day. We had some, I think we had some granola bars and stuff like that, maybe some beef jerky and some water, right? And then we weren't even carrying a lot of ammunition. I think I had the 6 rounds that were in my gun, and I think I had another 12 rounds in one of my jacket pockets. So I wasn't, this is way before Dogman or any of that kind of stuff, right? I didn't even think about that kind of stuff at the time. So we decide that we're gonna walk all the way on this trail. You can go to one end and come back in about 4 hours. So we start. We both got backpacks on. We actually, not by plan, but we both kind of looked similar in our dress, our guns. It was kind of like I felt embarrassed, like people were going to get the wrong idea about us. But anyway. So we get on the trail and we start walking, and in about, I don't know, maybe an hour and a half into it, I'm getting a little winded, but we're doing okay. And he says, "Hey, let's cut through here." It was to our left. He says, "Let's cut through here. This looks interesting over here." And I'm like, even at that time, I've told you and your audience before, I have a fear of getting lost in the woods.
Yeah.
And so I was totally trying to convince him, I'm like, "Dude, no, man." He's like, "No, come on, I know." He's like, "I got a compass." And I was like, "Oh, well, if you got a compass, right?" So he convinces me. I'm like, "Okay." It did kind of look fun because there was a stream. We could see a stream. And I said, "All right, fine, we'll do it." So we decide we're going to go off the trail, which, you're not supposed to do that, right? But I think we'd only seen one other person on this trail at this particular time. It was kind of early in the day maybe, but so we go off to our left and we're walking, and I said, "Hey dude, make sure that you know what," he's like, I got it, dude. I'm looking at the compass. I got it. Okay. I trust him. He turned out to be right. So we walk for another mile or so, and we're kind of like going, which would be north, right? We made a left, and we were going north on the trail, and we turned left, which when you're going north and you turn left, that's west, right? And we went west for maybe a mile or so, and then we started going north again, right? And we came to this stream. It wasn't the stream that we had originally seen. This was a bigger stream. It was probably 8 feet, maybe 10 feet wide, and maybe 2 feet deep. Definitely not, you could easily walk through it. But fresh, clean water. You could have that sound that water makes when it's going over rocks, and it was very peaceful there. It was, it's at this point, it's 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning. It's a beautiful sunny day, very, very pleasant, right? And it turned out Andrew turned out to be a really cool guy. He ended up working for me for another couple of years after that, and we became good friends. We used to joke about what I thought, once I told him about it, we started laughing about it. But anyway, so we come to this, I don't even know the word to describe it. It's like a mud bridge is what I'll say. It was like maybe it was something that a beaver did. I don't know. I'm not an outdoorsman, but it was this berm that was over the water, right? There was a stream, and it was kind of like it was the stream was kind of like not powerful going through it because there wasn't that big of a hole for it to go under. It did seem to me like an animal had done this, right? But it was a circular, almost like a rainbow pattern over the water, right? It was like a rounded, you could actually walk over it, and I could see that other people had walked over it. So we get up on there, we decide we're going to cross and go to the other side instead of having to walk through the stream. So we're looking, we get up on the berm, and it's maybe, I don't know, 4 feet at the height, right? But it did give us a nice view down the stream. So we're looking, for your audience sake, we're looking, see if we're going north. So we're looking west as the stream is flowing. It's flowing east to west, right? And we're looking down the stream, right? And I'm just taking stuff in, and he's got these small, I don't even know what they're called, micronoculars, I think, or something. They're not really binoculars. They're like these little binoculars, and I'm sure most of your audience knows what I'm talking about. They look like tiny little binoculars, right? and I'm carrying them, right? He gave them to me to carry, and I'm carrying them. So I'm looking around. I decide I'm going to use the binoculars. So I put the binoculars, but I'm looking downstream. And as I'm looking downstream, I see this brown, I would say 200 yards from me. You know, it could even been 300 yards. So let's say somewhere between 200 and 300 yards. I see this brown thing in the middle of the stream, like a reddish brown, probably similar to what most people have seen up in that area. It was like a reddish brown. I couldn't quite tell. These weren't really particularly powerful binoculars. Even at that short distance, I really couldn't see specifics. Although I could see that the face had no hair on it, or very little hair, as compared to the rest of the body. But whatever this thing was, it was squatting in the water. Not like it was taking a dump, but it was just squatting in the water, and it had its hands in the water, right? And so I'm seeing this, and it took me literally, I would say, 15 seconds to say anything. I'm just staring at it, right? And I tell Andrew, I said, I took him off because I had him on around my neck. I take him off my neck and I hand him. I said, dude, tell me what you see. Look down the stream and tell me what you see. And he's like, what? And he's like looking, and it was far enough away that he could see like something out that far, but he couldn't see what it was. So he takes the binoculars, he looks through them, and I'm watching his expression, and his mouth opens, right? And his mouth is open, and he's looking, and he goes, dude. And I know some of your audience is going to get angry with me at speaking, but I'm from California, and he was from California. We say dude a lot. He's like, dude. I said, is that what I think it is? And he goes, I don't know, but it sure looks like it. And I said, so and we got to understand, we were far enough away that, he couldn't, whatever this thing was, well, it turned out to be a Bigfoot, but it couldn't hear us. So we may have been a full 300 yards away. We were far enough away that it hadn't noticed it yet, because it was doing something. And there were trees that struck branches that were coming across the because there were trees on both sides of the stream, right? I know I'm not being as sharp as I normally am when I get my stories, but this is a long time ago, and I'm trying to remember. But there were branches that were coming from both sides, so it wasn't like even if he looked, he might not have noticed us because of all the branches, right? If he really focused on it, he would have been able to see us, but he was busy doing whatever he was doing. So when Andrew brings down the binoculars, he looks at me and he goes, son of a bitch. Because I didn't think they existed. And I said, well, I always believed that they did. We're having this conversation very casually, right? And he's like, let's move on, dude. Let's get out of here, right? And so then I stop, and I did the quintessential, as Jeff would say, I did the quintessential Brad move. I grab his arm, and I say, hey, let me ask you something. And he goes, what? And I said, and he looks at me, and he starts shaking his head. I said, do you want to be famous? And he goes, famous? And I said, yeah, do you want to be famous? He said, well, what, you want to like get a picture? And I said, well, and we didn't have our cell phones with us. So I said, well, I didn't bring a camera. And he's like, well, how are we going to get famous then? I said, well, do you want to hear it or not? And he's like, and he's shaking his head, and he goes, I don't think I want to hear this. And I said, well, you're going to hear it. I'm your boss. Listen to me, right? He goes, what? And I said, that one of those, supposedly, even though we all know that one of those things had been brought down before, they just hide them, right? But I said, if we brought one of these down, not only would we be famous, but they're going to make books about it, movies. I said, we would be wealthy, literally. And Jeff, you know this, and some of your audience know this too. That's a fact.
Yeah.
So he starts laughing. He goes, you are, and he didn't complete his sentence, but I knew what he was getting ready to say. And I said, look, think about it, dude. I said, if we are armed. I said, if we bring one down, right? I mean, we can figure out a way and bring somebody back up here, and then they start telling the story, maybe get some pictures, who knows? And he he wasn't really enthusiastic about it. Let's just say that. But so he starts to walk away, and I grab his arm again, and I said, "Come on, dude, don't be a pussy." I'm using the old "don't be a pussy," right? And which, that always works for most guys anyway. And he's like, he takes a deep breath, and he goes, "What's your plan?" And I said, "Well, look, I tell you what. You go on to the other side of the berm, walk down, go about 50 yards into the woods, and cut left, and go directly so that you can, and then when you stop, when you see him directly, right? In other words, we're looking west at him on the berm, right? He's in the middle of the stream. I tell Andrew to go north, make a left, and then when he gets to exactly where the Bigfoot is, he comes at him, right, with his gun. And he's like, "Okay, well, what are you going to do?" And I said, "I'm going to walk down the berm onto the far side, and I'm going to come up," because there was mud and there was a little bit of a I don't even know what you'd call it, dude. The where the water hit the the bank. There was maybe 2 feet before the trees started. Now, I knew I was going to get mud. I was going to get covered in mud, but my plan, as I told him, is that I said, "I'll sneak up on the bank of the river because I'm not in his line of sight. And I'll sneak up, and then when I know that you're there, when you get to where I tell you to get to, and, I'll look over at you when you can see me and I can see you, I'll look over at you and you come straight at him, right? And I'll start firing to try to wound him, and you can finish him off because I'll get closer than you." And he goes, "Dude, you're absolutely fucking crazy." I said, "Well, that may be, but I think he goes, "Well, it might work." And I said, "Okay, well." So he goes down the embankment. He starts walking. I wait, and I'm just standing there looking at him, at the Bigfoot. I'm watching him to make sure he doesn't leave, right? And then I figured out what he was doing. He stood up, and he was bathing. He was bathing in the stream, believe it or not. At least that's what it looked like to me.
Right.
Because he was putting water on his arms. He put some on his face. So once I saw Andrew get out of my line of sight, in other words, he'd started moving west again, and I couldn't see him, I walked down the other side of the berm. I start walking on. I come around the bottom of the berm, and I start walking on the embankment. I pull my gun out, and I start slowly walking up the embankment slowly walking toward it, but on the bank. So he's in the middle of this 8 to 10 foot wide stream. I'm coming up, which would be behind him because he's facing in the opposite direction. So he can't see me. And I'm moving incredibly slow. And I knew I was moving so slow that Andrew was going to get to where I told him to get, where he could look directly at him. Right. And I knew I was going to be late to the game because I was having to move so slowly because I knew he'd hear me if I made too much noise or I tried to move so quickly. It must have taken, it's hard to remember, but I would say 5 minutes for me to get to where I was within, I would say, I told you this one, I told you the story. I think I was between 40 and 50 yards from him.
Yeah. Okay.
So I've already got my gun. I'm not pointing it at him. I'm holding it at my side, right? And when I get to about 50 yards, roughly 50 yards anyway, I stopped, and I was just really looking. And this animal was impressive. Let's just say that. He was covered in hair. He had the classic, I guess you call it a cone head. He didn't have any real hair on his face. He looked to me, now some people say this is not what they are, but he looked to me to be exactly halfway between a man and an ape. That's what he looked like to me. And at 50 yards, I was getting a pretty good view of him. He was huge. He had to have been at least 8 feet. And I would say weight-wise, definitely heavier than a Dogman. I'd say he probably weighed 800 pounds. Huge feet, right? And his hands were huge. He was muscled, but he was also kind of chubby looking too. He didn't have like that, he had wide shoulders, but he had kind of a belly on him. I don't know if that's because he was older or what, but he was he wasn't the most in shape. I've heard stories. People say, "Oh no, their chest is really wide and they're strong." And he looked strong, but he looked like he had a little bit of a belly on him.
Right.
And like I said, a reddish brown color, like mostly brown, but it had that red tint to it. And so I get to about 50 yards, like I said, and I stop, and I'm just looking at him. And I know I'm looking to my right to see if Andrew has gotten to where and he wasn't there yet for some reason. I'm thinking, oh my God, did he puss out? That was my first thought. He's not gonna show up, right? So I take about another maybe 4 or 5 steps. Now I'm probably 40 to 45 yards at it from him. I look to my right, and I can see Andrew standing there about 25 yards to my right. I'm looking at him. This animal is slightly to my left, but in front of me, slightly to my left. He hasn't noticed me yet. But when I turned to look to see if Andrew was there, he was, right? And I could see him bringing his gun up, right? And when I saw that, I brought my gun up and I put it into single action. I clicked the hammer back. And when I clicked the hammer back, the Bigfoot's head spun and he looked right at me. And I could see that he was totally, like I said, halfway between a man and an ape. He had no hair on his face, but he had hair everywhere else covered in it. It was a shaggy, but he was wet too. Everywhere he was wet. So I knew that he'd been bathing. So I knew, this is how stupid I was at the time. So I lift up the gun and I took about another 2 steps. I honestly believe I was just about 40 yards for him when I opened up. So I just start walking into the stream, right, towards him, right? And I pulled back the first one and I aimed right at him at 40 yards and I missed. And when I fired, he jumped out of the water. And as soon as I fired, Andrew just started pulling the trigger. I don't even know if he was aiming. He was just walking towards him fast, pulling the trigger. And I started doing the same. I just started pulling the trigger. Bang, 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 bang. Well, I mean, that just shows you where my level of experience was at the time. Yeah. He jumps out of the water and in one jump, he jumped from the middle of the stream. He leaped and got to the bank on the far side. And then he immediately started going up this steep embankment. There were trees everywhere because it was forest. But he started going up this embankment, right? And I'm trying to. We both have already blew our loads, right? We've already fired 12 rounds, and Andrew runs up beside me and comes into the water, and we're both trying to reload because we can see him going up this hill, right? But by the time we both got reloaded and brought the guns back up to bear, he was too far gone. I think Andrew may have fired a couple of more times and it hit trees, but he was already well. I'd say he was probably 150 yards away. We weren't going to hit him with a handgun at 150 yards. So I look at Andrew and I say, "Did you hit him?" And he goes, "I don't think I hit him once." And I said, "I don't think I hit him once either." So we fired 12 rounds of .44 Magnum at him from maybe 40 to 50 yards away. Maybe even a little less than that for the last couple of rounds, and we did not hit him one time. At least he didn't act, and he would have reacted if a .44 mag would have hit him anywhere, like his back, his butt, his leg. Yeah, he would have reacted, and he didn't. He just jumped out of the water and made it up to. And he kept. One thing I remember was as he was going up the steep forest, right? It was like a hilled embankment, right? He was grabbing the trees to pull himself up the hill at a faster pace, right? And these trees were bending because they weren't like thick, 200-year-old oaks. These were maybe 2 foot around trees or a foot around trees. And as he was grabbing, he was bending them because of his weight, right? And he was pulling himself up quicker. He moved with incredible speed. He's not quite as fast as the Dogman, but he's a lot heavier. Right. Yeah. But he got out, and so. And so Andrew and I are standing in the middle of the stream, right? And so we walk over to see where he'd been standing, right? And we walked over and we saw this it was like, how when somebody's got a lot of oil on them, you can see the sheen on the water? Yeah. And even though the water, it had a slight current to it. There was an area where you could see the sheen on the water. Well, yeah, because he was filthy. He was disgusting. He really was. It was an odor. It wasn't that bad because we didn't get that close to him, but I could smell this really musty. It wasn't like a wet dog smell, obviously, but it was just this musty. I'm not going to use the term for your females that are listening, but there was a musty kind of odor, let's just say. And when we walked up and started looking directly down at where he'd been bathing, there was this sheen. And even though the stream itself was moving slightly, we could still see the sheen and where he had, and it was kind of darker. The water was kind of darker where he had been bathing. And Andrew says to me, he says, well, do you want to chase him? And I looked at him, I said, nah, don't be stupid, dude. We're not going up into his, area where he knows, and, not only that, but we've already expended a lot of ammunition. I'm not going to go up there looking. We had our chance. We blew it. So he's like, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, let's just go back. So we ended up, he breaks out his compass and we make it back to the trail. And I remember when we got back to the car, it was probably, by the time we got back to the car, it was already maybe 2 p.m, somewhere in there. Because we ended up meandering around a little bit. We actually met some females that were hiking. They were on the trail, but we ended up hanging out with them, talking for a while until we got back to the car. So we get into the car, and this funny part of the story, when we're driving home, he looks over at me and he says, so that happened, right? And I said, I believe it did. And he goes, are we going to tell anybody about this? And I said, I'm not going to tell anybody about this. If you want to tell anybody, don't bring my name into it. Because I owned a company at the time. I had the city that I lived in, I was a member of the Chamber of Commerce, and I didn't need this story getting out and ruining my business, right?
Right.
So I said, don't bring my name. If you want to tell the story, go for it. I got no problem with you telling the story. Just don't act like you were with somebody else or by yourself. And he goes, no, I'm embarrassed, dude. And I said, embarrassed? And he's like, yeah, I'm not going to tell anybody. I said, you going to tell your girlfriend? And he goes, well, are you going to tell your wife? And I said, well, yeah, I'm going to tell my wife, but nobody else. Okay. So he says, well, so to end the story on that one, the following Monday, actually, I think it was a Tuesday, he comes in and he's sitting in front of me. I had a big oak desk, right? And he's sitting on the other side of it, and I had the door closed to my office. And he says, dude, I was just thinking about it over the weekend. That didn't really happen, did it? I said, you must really be like, what would I call it, PTSD? I said, you got some PTSD, dude, if you're really in that much of denial. I looked at him, I said, it happened, Andrew. It happened. We saw it. And he just kind of shook his head. He's like, damn, that's something I'm going to remember for the rest of my life. And I said, well, yeah, no shit. I'll remember it too.
Yeah.
And that was the story. He ended up working for me for another couple of years. And then he I forgot what ended up happening to him, but I know he came into my office one time and he quit. He was going to go do something else. Oh, he became a firefighter. That's what it was. He got on as a volunteer while he worked for me, and then an opening came up, and he ended up in his mid-30s, I think. He ended up becoming a full-time firefighter for the county. So, and that was it. That was the story.
When you told me that, just kind of a quick interlude between that and the next one. When you first told me that, you said, I had a Bigfoot encounter before the one that happened in September. And I was like, you did? And you said, yeah, well, it's not exciting. And I said, oh, okay. And I literally was thinking something completely different because you said it's not exciting. But then when you looked at Andrew...
In comparison to our Dogman stories.
I know, but when you looked at Andrew and the whole thing of, the joke in the very beginning about him, and then you look at him and you're like, you want to be famous? And I can just picture, like a younger you, and this poor guy who is into firearms, but not, and it just made me laugh because of how I could just picture two people, randomly.
It's like you said. You said it in the pre-interview today. You said that's quintessential Brad. It was, dude. I was thinking in terms of, because I've always been about money, right? I mean, I don't want to make your audience think that I'm that's all I'm about, but I've always been somebody that was focused. If you look at my business record and the things I got into, I was always about making a lot of money, because I've been well off and I've been poor. I can tell you well off is better. So I've always been about money. And my thought when I saw this, I'm being honest right now. It wasn't like, oh, how unique Bigfoot. This wasn't who I was at that time, right?
Yeah.
My first thought was, well, shit, dude. If we play our cards right, we can bring this thing down, and then we're going to get movie rights. We're going to get somebody's going to write a book about us. We're going to
big dollar signs running through the woods.
Yeah, we're going to be those guys that were able to kill the first Bigfoot. And that's how I thought at the time, right? That was in the middle of my when that happened. That was when I was still training MMA, so I thought of myself in a certain way. I never fought in MMA in a real fight. I used to train at it, though, at the place where there was a local gym that had MMA training, and I used to go in there for about 2 years. And I was just done with it at the time, or maybe I might have been still doing it at the time, but I considered myself, which was not true, but I considered myself a badass at the time. And so, I'm thinking if we can play this right. And you know what? The funny thing is, though, Jeff, if we would have hit it, it might have been a different story.
Yeah.
If you think about it, I mean, you hit it once or twice with 44 mag, it might have slowed it down enough that we could have come up on it and finished it.
Yeah.
And you never know. I mean, I'm pretty sure we didn't hit it at all, just because I said it. Like I said, it didn't react like it had been hit, and we never heard it. It didn't do any of those yells you hear. It was, once it saw us and realized what we were doing and what we were trying to do, it bolted. And it didn't try to scare us. It didn't try to turn and face us. I think it knew, what we were attempting to do, which was kill it.
Right.
And, they are fairly intelligent. But like I said, all I'll say in closing on that, people might laugh at this encounter, but had we hit it, things might have been much different.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, in a couple different ways too. Like you said, you might have taken it down and walked up and finished it off. Or, something could have went bad, actually, who knows? There might have been one or two up in that high ground, so it's just,
we thought of that too. We thought that there might have been more, but
but you weren't thinking at that point. You're not thinking, you're thinking, you see it and you're just like, oh shit, let's be famous, and just when you said that to me, I laughed my ass off the rest of the night when you told me that story. And I was just like, this is incredible. I cannot wait.
Like I said, you said it best, dude. Quintessential Brad.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I consider myself a little bit, because of my background and my business background, I'm not your typical, Dogman participant. I've never been a woodsman or an outdoorsman, or, as I've said many times on your show, I'm just an old surfer from Southern California.
Adrenaline junkie.
Who's an adrenaline junkie, and it's got a little bit of balls. That's really all I am, dude. And I'm nothing special in any way. But it's like you said, quintessential, meaning that this is how Brad thinks. He's different than, some of the people might have been like, oh God, let's try to get close and make contact with it, or let's try to take photos of it and maybe can we become friends with it, or let's drop down and pray to it. No. None of that. My thought was, when we were looking at it, and I remember that thought distinctly, I turned at him with the typical Brad smile, and I said, you want to be famous?
Yeah.
And he wasn't really into it. And to his credit, though, he gave it a try, but I think he was really scared. I was scared, too. I'm not saying I wasn't, but I think he was a lot more scared than I was, because he had a straight-on view of it as he was running towards it, or jogging towards it. I mean, I don't see how either one of us missed all 6 rounds, but that's what happened. As I told it to you, was the best that I can remember, that we did not hit it one time.
Yeah.
So Yeah. And when I say that wasn't, it wasn't, I'm sure it's interesting to people, but to me, when I look back on that compared to what's happened to me with Dogman, it's not, on the same level as the Dogman stories. And that's what I meant by that. So.
Yeah. No, to me, it's just typical Brad right there. And that's why I don't know. So, all right, let's jump into September of last year.
This story happened, and this is the reason I'm willing to give these stories. And by the way, I have kept my word. I have not gone in the forest since the last encounter, and I will not. So I'm not going to ever break my word. In case some of you think, there's only one scenario I'll go in the woods, and that's something Jeff and I are going to work on at some point in the future. But other than that, I will never go in the woods again. Yeah. This happened before that in September. This was well before the last encounter I had.
Yeah. This was in September. I want to say something really quick. This is when you had come back after we had done the Brad redemption, right. And then you had shared
the Daniel story,
and you came back for like a half an hour to like 40 minutes, and we talked about when you had got
I went up there by myself to take a picture, and I had the camera stolen. Yes. Yep.
And there was that. I think that was like in August, maybe late July, early August, and then you had texted me out of the blue, and you said, "I got to tell you something. Let's do a show." I was really excited about it, and then out of the blue, you didn't text me. You just called me, and you said, "We're not doing it," and now you finished the rest.
Yeah, that's what happened, and your audience deserves to hear what happened. It was me completely wigging out, which I don't normally do. I pride myself on being pretty level-headed, but I completely wigged out because when I called Jeff, I had what I thought was a really great story to tell. Now, this wasn't in the same area. First off, we need to get something straight. This was over off the 260, I believe it is, highway, not even close to the same area that the Dogman encounters happened. Not even, I'd say, an hour away from that by driving. And this happened on the way to a city called Payson. I think it's the 260. I haven't been on it since, but I think it's the 260 that runs across, and you can make it all the way to Payson. You go through Strawberry and a bunch of other places, but when you get to a certain point on this highway, to your left and to your right is forest. Now, again, it's not East Coast forest like I know you're aware of, Jeff, but it is forest, okay? And again, this is central Arizona to those of your listeners who don't live here. And the people that do live here, you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. Central Arizona. In fact, it's right in the center of Arizona. And there's all kinds of legends in this area about something called, you and I spoke about, called the Morgulin or Morgulin monster.
Yeah.
I think it's called something. I think it's a Bigfoot. I'm not sure if it's a Bigfoot, but I remember when this first happened, I was looking up sightings, and I found this, that many people had this sighting of the Morgulin.
Mogulin or whatever.
Mogulin, whatever it was.
Yeah.
I told you about it. You'd heard of it. And it was in this area that people have had these sightings.
Yep.
Or close to the area.
The forest that you're in, just so to clarify, it's a lot of pine. It's mainly pine, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Yes. There's some other types of trees too, but 85 or 90% of it is pine, yes.
Okay.
So this happened in September, and to finish off Jeff's point, I called him and told him that I wanted to do this story with him. I thought he would enjoy this. His audience would like it. And then I told him, but I was busy doing some stuff, so I said, let me call you in another week or two, and he said, Jeff says, okay, fine. And in the interim, between the time I first called and when we were planning on doing the show, I had taken photographs of footprints, and these were the clearest photographs that I have ever seen in the Bigfoot world. I'm going to tell. I'm not a photographer, but these were taken with my Apple phone up close. They were 17 inches. from heel to toe, which puts the animal at, my Bigfoot research, that puts him at close to 8 feet. Okay. I had those pictures on my phone, and the reason I backed out of doing the original interview with Jeff, what had nothing to do with Jeff, it was me. I panicked because right before I called Jeff, like, okay, I'm gonna call him, we're gonna do the interview, I was gonna bring bring the pictures up to text to Jeff so that he had them, so he could put them up on his how he puts up evidence whenever he gets pictures. I was gonna give him the picture so he could put them up on his site or his YouTube channel. So I start looking through my phone, and I'm like, okay, well, they were right here. You know how you're in your phone, it's in the front pictures, right? Yep. So I'm scrolling backwards, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm like, well, I must have, because you can misplace pictures. I've learned that, right? I still don't know how to use all the applications of my phone yet, but I've learned that you can misplace pictures, and they can show up farther back on your time frame, right, than what you think. So I'm scrolling through, and I'm like, well, shit, I must have put them all the way back, right? So I end up going through, I have about, I would say 3,000 pictures on my phone, and I'm not even a person. I know there's people who've got way more than that, but I'm going through pictures of my daughters. I'm going through pictures of my ex-wife. I mean, I'm like, okay, I'm going to some of the pictures I have of guns. I'm getting through all these, and I could tell that I'm getting back way in time. And I get all the way back to the first picture from like when I first had my first iPhone, which was, I think I had my first iPhone in 2014, 2013. So I'm looking at pictures that are 10 years old or 9 years old, right? And I'm like, okay, well, it's not here. So I thought, well, that's odd, because they should be at least in the last 5 or 6 pictures that I've taken with my phone. Right. So I decided, well, I must have missed it. So I sit down again. This is all as I'm getting ready to text this to Jeff for your audience clarification here. I want to text Jeff these pictures before we did the interview so he could put them up on his YouTube site. So I decided I'm going to go back through the pictures again. So I go back all the way through. It took me literally probably 45 minutes to get through all the pictures again, and they're not there. So now I'm thinking, okay, did I erase them? So I said, okay, well, as I told Jeff, I said, I know you can go, and if you take your phone to the Apple store, if you've deleted pictures, they can still retrieve them. So I thought, okay, well, I must have deleted them, right? There's no other explanation for it, right? It didn't even occur to me yet what I ended up thinking ended up happening, right? So I take them down to the Apple store. I said, hey, I need you guys to, at first it was a young girl, and she's like, well, I don't understand what you want me to do. There's no fun. I said, I need you to see if the pictures that and I knew the date that it was, I think it was on the 17th of September. I said, I took pictures of some footprints. I didn't tell her what they were. I just said some footprints, and I know they were on my phone because I saw them not too long ago, but now they're gone. And she goes, well, did you delete them? And I said, well, I don't think I did, but I need you to retrieve them. So she's like, okay, well, that's beyond what I can do. So this geek-looking guy comes out, and he's like, what do you need? So I told him what I need. So he's like, okay. He's got my phone for about 20 minutes. And he's like, what are you looking for? When he comes back out, I told him, I said, pictures of footprints. He's like, there's no pictures of footprints on here, dude, at all. I said, you're sure? He's like, I'm sure. You have no pictures on here whatsoever. And I'm not a phone master, so I don't even know how to use all the things that my phone can do even today, right? So he hands me back the phone, and now I'm panicking as I'm driving back to the house because I'm thinking somebody erased my phone, or somebody erased these pictures on my phone, and who could that be? And the only thing I can think of, so I get home, I call Jeff, right? And Jeff's like, well, did you take it to the iPhone store? I said, I did. And he said, there's nothing? I said, there's nothing, dude. I said, and that's when I started panicking. I'm like, there's only one group of people who could have erased these pictures. And then Jeff's like, well, why would they erase footprints? Because, there's a lot of people that have pictures of footprints. And I said, yeah, but these were really, and that's the only thing we could come up with, these were really clear. And you could see the outline of the toes, the heel. These were, and I'd taken pictures of my size 11s that were next to it. And that's how we figured out that they were about 17 and a half inches. Much bigger than than a human. I mean, unless you're talking Shaq. I know Shaq I think Shaq wears a 19, but these were huge feet, right? I mean, I'm telling you, this must have been an 8-foot creature.
Yeah.
So I decided that I said, Jeff, I've been warned, and this is before I had gone out and been told by that guy that nobody believes you. And in other words, the pressure was off of me. You can talk to who you want. I still was under the assumption that I had been warned twice, because if you go back and listen to our shows that Jeff and I did, I had been told that I'd been warned twice and that I wasn't going to be warned a third time.
Yep.
So, and Jeff knows what I'm talking about. So I decided at that point, Jeff's like, no, let's do the show. And I'm like, dude, I just can't, dude, because if I'm right and they were the ones who erased these photos, now I realize now looking back on it that we probably could have done the show and nothing would have happened, but that was my mindset. Okay. So that tells you what happened with Jeff and I, and that's when I think he advertised that he was going to do the show, and then I kind of felt bad because I backed out, but I pussied out. It was all on me. It had nothing to do with Jeff.
Well, I can understand it because you had the same thing happen in Oklahoma, right?
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
I mean, 2 times in a row, not in a row, but the same thing to happen 2 times, different periods of time in your life, but similar. Why wouldn't you freak out, And I didn't blame you at the time. I was a little confused. I was like, well, this is weird. And, because I'm used to Brad being Brad. And that's what made it so strange, because it really freaked you out bad.
It did. I panicked a little bit, and I thought, you know what? They're sending me a message. That's what I thought. And I don't have to tell your audience who I thought it was. You guys all know who Jeff and I both think it was, because who else would have the ability to do that?
Yeah.
And so I panicked and I backed out, and then Jeff was always on me to, hey, one of these days we'll do the show. And then the last time I told the story about the guys that, again, had nothing to do with me, but the guys that went up there and massacred. I call it I've been trying to get people to catch on to it at the Highway 89 massacre. That happened, and Jeff's like, hey, let's do the Bigfoot stories. I was like, all right, well, you really want to hear them. Okay, so this is getting into the story now. So in September of last year, it is right when I started doing what I told you guys I had been doing, where I would put weight on my shoulders. I'd pack out everything on all my equipment. This was right when I started that, okay? And then I switched up because of the incident I'm about to tell you. I went back to where I had the incidents with again, call it whatever you want, the angel or the really good-looking tall guy, right? One of the two, whatever you want to say. So I had, after that, I had decided I was going to, it's a little closer too. It's not quite as far away. So I thought I would do my training in this particular area off the 260 on the way to Payson, because I had noticed, I'd been to Payson a few times. I really like Payson. And I noticed when I was driving towards Payson, there was this huge forest on the left and on the right. And I thought that'd be a cool place to just, head out, because you can go straight out into the forest. Excuse me. And you can come right back. And that's important to me, as your audience knows, I have a phobia about getting lost in the forest. So I thought, okay, this would be a great place to just park and then, use my compass and walk straight out and then come straight back. And this is where I first started doing that. So in September of last year, so what are we talking, 11 months ago now? Yeah. Not quite 11 months, but I decided that I was going to, I took my Mauser with me, which is for those of you who don't know, it's a bolt action rifle the Germans used in World War II. And it shoots an 8mm, which is basically the same. For the gun nuts, it's a little tiny bit less powerful than a 30-06, but still but it is more powerful than the 308. And you can carry 5 in the magazine and 1 in the chamber. So you can have 6. So I was going to carry that. I put on my tactical vest. I had a backpack on. I wasn't carrying that much weight. I think I maybe had 40 pounds on me because I was just starting. I think I originally started at 40 pounds. And I had been going to this place for maybe 6 weeks. I had been trying to make it out there every 2 weeks. I would go out, and I was still not doing very far. I was going like 3 miles out, 3 miles back, just enough to start to get my body used to carrying a lot of heavy weight. So on this particular day, I believe it was a Friday, I parked my car right on the side of the road. You don't even have to go anywhere. You can just park it right on the side of the highway and then walk across into this forest. And for those of people who know the area, they know exactly where I'm talking about. And so I park. I get to the foresty part, and I pull over to the right. I cross the street. There was nobody around. This was probably in the time of day, I'd say 9 o'clock, because it took me about an hour and a half to get to this place from where I live. So I pull up, I put all my stuff on, check my backpack, make sure I got my water. You never want to go in the forest and not have water. So I got water. I figure, okay, I got my pedometer on. I'm going to do 3 miles out, 3 miles back. So I'd started originally with 5 miles, and I had just increased to 6. I'm carrying, and this was one of the first times that I decided to carry a rifle. Well, before that, I had just been carrying handguns, but I wanted to really start getting, because our Mauser is about 8 pounds. So I wanted to get used to carrying a rifle. And I didn't actually even bring any extra ammunition. I only had I had a handgun on me. Actually, I had 2 handguns on me, but I only had the 6 rounds that were in the Mauser. I didn't have any extra Mauser ammunition because I'd been here before, and nothing had happened. I hadn't even seen any animals other than some coyotes. So I park my car, I walk across the street, I get all geared up, and I start walking. I go maybe, I would say maybe 2 miles I got, approximately. And I decide that I'm going to stop. So I take my backpack off, and I'm going to lean up against a tree, right? I'm totally alone. There's nobody out there. It was beautiful, nice sunny day. And as I sit down, I hear like this. I'm sitting down on a tree, but there's an opening in the trees, and then again, this isn't deep, heavy forest. This is what I would use the term light forest, right? There's trees everywhere, but they're not on top of each other, right? So there's big gaps in between these trees, and you can see, right? And there was this opening, I would say about 150 yards, 160 yards from me. I'm sitting down facing east. So to my left would be north of my position. And I'm sitting there and I'm drinking some water, and I notice to my left, which would be north, about 150 yards, I start hearing this. It's like a banging noise, right? Like a thwack, thwack, thwack. And, I can't really see what's making the noise. So I take a swig of my water, put my water away, I get up, and I've got some regular-sized binoculars. I pull them out. I start looking around, and I noticed from where I'm sitting, I stood up, and now I'm facing north, but northeast of my position, about 150, 160 yards away. I look, and I hear this noise coming from, and it sounds like somebody's hitting a tree. So I take a few steps to get where I can get a clear view of where I'm looking at, right? Because there were trees in the way. So I take about maybe 4 steps to clear so I could see what it was I was looking at. And sure enough, when I get about 4 steps, I pass a tree, and I look a little bit to my right, and just directly ahead of me, but maybe 15 degrees to my right. Okay. I see this large, much darker hair than the story that I told you earlier. Much darker. It was still brown, but it was a deep, dark brown, almost like a chocolate-colored brown. And I see, and I knew immediately what it was, because I could see. I'm looking at it through binoculars at only 150 yards. I could see it clearly. And it's bent down at the bottom of a tree, like it's either digging at the tree or looking for something. I don't know why it was hitting the tree. I don't know what it was looking for. I'd always said I was going to go over there and look. Before any of what I'm about to tell you happened, I made a mental note that I was going to go over there and see if I could see what it was digging for, because that's what it looked like it was doing to me. Like it was either trying to find food or maybe it was burying something. I don't know, but it was at the bottom of the tree. It was on its knees and it was looking down at the tree. And it had a piece of wood in its hand, in its right hand. So I'm thinking to myself, my God, right? Is that the Morgullan or Magellan or whatever? What the hell Jeff said? Is that the same monster? It didn't look like the stories I heard of it. To me, it looked like a Bigfoot. So I decide that, okay, so I have a decision to make, which is always a decision Brad has to make, right? What am I going to do?
Right.
So I thought that I would go back. I took about 7 steps back. I looked again, and I couldn't see it fully, but I could see that it didn't appear that it had noticed me. So I'm standing there, and I think to my hands start shaking, and I'm like, because you have a real big decision to make. What are you going to do, right? Now, it's like the last time I had an encounter, I could have probably just backed away at that point and turned and started walking away, and it would have never known I was there, or not cared that I was there, one of the two. So I took a swig of water, put the water back in my backpack, and I'm actually giving it time to leave, right? And that's what at the time I was telling myself that's not what I was doing, but that's exactly what I was doing. I was wasting time hoping that I would come look again and it would be gone, right? But after I got my backpack on, I brought my rifle down, and I go over, and now I've got my rifle in my hand, and I held it in my left hand, and I look again. I walk up to the clearing, and I look again, and it's still there doing whatever it was doing, right? So I say, okay, well, what are we going to do here? So my plan was like, okay, I'm going to approach, I'm going to sneak up as best I can and get maybe within 100 yards, because Mausers are notorious for their accuracy. And I'm not a rifle guy, as your audience knows, but I'm thinking, I've got an 8mm Mauser. I might be able to take this thing down. So I make the decision. I look around, make sure I'm up by myself. I don't see any others. I say, well, if I can sneak up on it and get close enough, I might be able to hit it. And then if I can hit it once, maybe I can stun it enough, and then I can hit it again. But what I realized was that I didn't have one in the chamber. I thought I had 5 plus 1 in, so I realized I needed to work the bolt action to get around. So in other words, I only had 5 rounds total. I thought I had 6, but I didn't. I only had 5 rounds. So I needed to work the bolt to get a bullet. For your non-gun people, I had to work the bolt to get the bullet in the chamber.
Yeah.
Well, they're pretty loud.
Yeah, being an older gun, that's a loud.
So when I did that, when I did it, I didn't think he could hear it from where I was from him. But when I worked the bolt, I brought the gun up, and I could see that he had not only gotten up on it, he was now standing up. He was looking directly at me. One of those fearful moments, right? Yeah. And we're about at this point we're about 140 yards apart. I can clearly see what he is. 140 yards is not that far. I can clearly see what he is, and based on how tall he was to the looking at the tree, I think he was probably 8 foot, maybe 8'2", 8'3", somewhere in that neighborhood. Now, so I think, well, okay, what am I going to do, right? And it's one of those moments where you're like, what, are you going to do it or not? Because if you don't take a shot, he's going to move. So I bring up the rifle to fire, right? And he takes about 5 or 6 quick steps forward and lets out this. I've never heard anything like this, Dogman or anything related. I have never heard, I guess you'd call it a roar, right? He yelled or roared so loud that I fumbled the Mauser that was in my hand. I mean, he shook my organs. That's how I know people have said that before, but this really did happen. He was so loud with his roar, he made me fumble the rifle. And I could have shot myself in the head. The way that the rifle kind of came out of my hands, and I had to catch it before it hit the ground.
Wow.
And so I finally get the rifle, and I look up, and he's approaching, right? He's moving quickly towards me, right? So I take about 4 steps back, and I lean up to my left. On my left, I lean up against the tree because I know if he's going to come at me, I need to make this shot count, and I'm not particularly good with the rifle.
Right.
So he's running directly towards me. I want your audience to understand that he's running directly towards me. And he's got like this, his hands are back behind him. He's running, how do I explain this? He's running like bent at the torso with his face out in front and his hands behind him.
Like a tank coming at you.
Yeah, almost. Well, I don't know what you'd say, but it wasn't like he was running like we run with our arms swinging. He had put his arms behind him, and he was approaching me bent over with his face, like he was so angry. That's the way I took it was that he was so angry.
Yeah.
So I leaned up against the tree, right? I brought the gun up, and when he got to about maybe let's say between 35 and 40 yards, he stopped. And I had a feeling, because basically of just what had happened, that he was going to roar again. I realized he was trying to scare me at this point. And when he stopped, he let out this roar. Now, I was more prepared for it this time, and I didn't drop the gun, right? But it was so loud, I remember I had to close my eyes because it was so loud. And he was like, I could see the anger in his face, like I'm coming in on his territory type thing, right? And but when he stopped yelling, I opened my eyes, and he was still standing there. His chest was heaving, right? And you're taught when you hit one of these animals. I've done research on the Bigfoot. You're supposed to look for the dust cloud because they're always so filthy and dirty.
Yeah.
So I brought up the Mauser, and I aimed, and I fired, and I hit him. And I hit him in what I think was I was aiming for his heart, but I think I hit a little high, and I saw the dust cloud, and I saw his left shoulder move backwards. And he lets out another scream, right? This was a pain scream. So by the time I worked, he's charging towards me, right? By the time I work the bolt and get one ready and bring it up, he stops about, let's say 20 to 25 yards. He might have been a little further away. I might have misspoke, but when he stopped the last time, he was 20 to 25 yards away from me. And I was bringing up I'd worked the bolt, and I was bringing it up again. I know he understood what I was about to do because he immediately took off to his right and started running straight. He was ducking through trees, right? So I already had one in the chamber, so I lifted it up and I tried to catch him. I was trying to catch him, even though he was running on away from me, right? I still tried to catch him either in his back or on his side, and I actually shot and fired again, and I heard the bullet hit the tree. And he just kept running, right? I chambered another round, but what I forgot to say was some of the ground was muddy. We have in Arizona, we have the monsoon season that's in August, late July, August, and even into early September. We have monsoons here, which means summer rain, right?
Yeah. And
there was still a lot of water on the ground. So after he runs off, I'm watching him run off, and I can feel how heavy he was, because as he was running off, I hear this thump, 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 thump getting farther away. And of course, at that point, the adrenaline crashes, right? And I just spun around. I sat back down where I was, and I'm leaning up against the tree, but my backpack is on still. So when I'm leaning up against the tree, I'm not really up against the tree, right? My backpack's in between. And I'm just sitting there, and I'm taking deep breaths, and I'm like, my God, with all I've already gone through in my life, I'm thinking, of course, now I know it's because of my scent. That's what that guy said anyway, that crazy guy. So I sit there for a few minutes, and then it dawns on me like, oh, I was going to go over and check what, I'm still looking around, obviously, because I'm not sure he won't show up with others or sneak up behind me, because they can be quiet, supposedly, when they want to be.
Right.
So I'm still spinning around looking, and so I don't see anybody, right? So I think I'm going to go over and look at what he was digging. But I didn't get that far, because when I got to where he was standing the last time in front of me, where he stopped maybe 20 yards from me, 60 feet from me, there was like mud in there. And it dawned on me, like, look for footprints. Sure enough, I looked down, and there they were. Big, perfect footprints in not real deep mud, which is actually better, because his foot didn't sink in where you can't really gauge the size. Sometimes if you step in mud and you go down too far, it makes your foot look smaller.
Yeah,
right?
It messes the shape up. And everything.
Yeah, it messes the shape. This was perfect. These were perfect pictures. I mean, perfect prints that I got pictures of. You could fully see the detail of his toe. One of his toes must have been either gone, or he had it curled when he made this thing, because you could see that one of the big toes was smaller than the other one. That could have been just that he had his toe curled, or he was missing it or whatever. But these were perfect prints. So I forgot all about going over to the tree. I got my camera out, my cell phone. I start taking pictures. I put my foot up next to him on both of them. These were perfect prints from where he was standing when he yelled at me the last time. So both of his feet were right next to each other. This wasn't like he was walking. He was standing with his foot spread when he yelled at me. He yelled so loud that, I'm sure everybody that was within a mile or two heard that yell, right?
Right.
But when he did that, he was standing in this mud. So, I get these pictures, and, the entire time that I'm out there, though, I'm completely, thinking he's going to show up, because I've wounded him, right? At least I think I wounded him. I mean, I know I hit him, but maybe it didn't hurt him that bad. Or maybe it hurt him enough, it just scared him away. I don't know. Yeah. But I only hit him once. I fired 2 rounds, so I knew I only had 3 rounds left in the rifle. I did have 2 357s on me that I always carry, but I didn't have any more rifle rounds. So I just put my backpack on. I put all my gear on. I took some more water, drank it before, and I just started walking back, right? But I walked backwards, I would say, half the time, because I was terrified that he was going to come up behind me.
Right.
So I made it all the way to my car. I get in the car. I come home, and I started doing research into Bigfoot at that point, and that's when I came across that Morgulin monster, Morgulin. And I realized that in this area that I was is where people have seen it before. Yeah. But the description of that particular creature doesn't match what I saw. So I think I really believe what I saw was just a Sasquatch.
Yeah. Let me ask you something. So you've had an experience. You've had your head-ons with Dogman, and this is the first time that I've heard this experience in its entirety.
Yeah, I get.
When you saw this thing stand up and it, trucking at you, was it a different kind of fear than the Dogman?
Yes, it was, because I'll tell you, that's a good question, Jeff. The reason it's a different fear is because, and I've heard people say this before, like if you've got 2 or 3 Dogmen, then yes, they could bring a Bigfoot down. But if you're talking one-on-one, this thing will tear a Dogman a new asshole, dude. I mean, right. The power that these things have. I mean, yes, the Dogman is bloodthirsty and it's a horrific animal, but a Bigfoot, dude, these things are massive. They weigh more and they're way stronger. And when they run, dude, and they're so heavy, you can feel the ground shake especially when they're running fast. I could feel the shaking of the ground as he's approaching me. Mm-hmm. I mean, so yes, the fear. I knew if he got a hold of me, it would be quicker even than with a Dogman, because he would have just broke my back.
Yeah.
Just like that, he would have broke my back.
That's what I was thinking too. It would be over so quick.
I've heard stories of several dogmen being able to defeat a Bigfoot. That's probably true. But one-on-one, I know there's some people say, oh, no, I don't believe, first of all, for your audience, I don't believe in the 15-foot dogman. Some people come on here and say, I don't believe 15-foot. I don't believe in 15-foot Bigfoot. I think Bigfoot's probably tops out at about 10 feet, and dogman probably tops out at about 9 feet. Yeah, that's my opinion.
I've heard like 8.5 for dogman on my channel. But Bigfoot, I've read different things, like older stories from like loggers out in Washington, like in the 1800s or whatever, like 12 feet. But I mean, that's back then. Gauging of height stuff is different.
Well, 10 feet, when you're looking from a distance, 10 foot does look like 12 foot, right?
Absolutely.
And another thing, the people that come on this show sometimes, and I'm not bagging on them, but I'm a realist, right? My experiences are real, and I the spiritual stuff and all that stuff, you've heard me say before. I don't discount it.
Show. Different show, not my.
Yeah, I don't discount all those things, but I've never experienced that.
Right.
And this is what I know, that I encountered a 9-foot. We thought with the one in Oklahoma, we believed this alpha male was a 9-foot dogman. Right? It was bigger than all the other ones, and all the other ones were 7.5 foot. Go back and listen. It's the Oklahoma story, the first encounter when I took the team out to try to bring one down. We encountered what we thought was a 9-foot alpha male, and that's the biggest one that, of course, I've ever encountered.
Yeah.
What your audience has to understand, these people that come on and say, oh, no, there was a 20-foot, there was one guy that came on, and I know you were like, come on, dude. There was one guy that came on and was like, it's 20-foot dog, man. Dude, look, first of all, when you have an animal that's 20 feet, it can't hide from helicopters.
Yeah.
So they would be spotted. A 10-foot, yeah, you could still hide under a tree. You can still, make it through the brush and stuff and not be seen from miles away. But when you start talking 18, 20 feet.
20 feet's a pitch of a house. It's the peak of a house in some houses.
Right, exactly. That's exactly right. You can't hide anymore. Yeah. And I'm not saying that people that tell these stories are lying. What I'm saying is they're just misjudging the size. That's what I'm saying.
Out of fear or whatever. And yeah.
I don't believe. I honestly believe that Sasquatch tops out at about 10 and Dogman tops out at about 9. From my experience and what I've read, and there's a lot of people who would agree with me on that. Let's say that.
I agree with you. That Dogman that you saw, the alpha in Oklahoma, compared to this Bigfoot that you saw, would be a little taller.
He was a little. The Dogman would have been a little taller. If I had to guess, just based on when he stood up looking at the tree that he was next, I would say he was slightly over 8 feet. And the 17 to 17 and a half inch footprints, according to the research I went online and looked, that puts him at right around 8 feet.
Yeah, 8.5. But the mass would be so much more bigger than that.
Dude, he weighed honestly, he weighed probably 300 pounds more. The Dogman, the 9-foot Dogman that I saw, we thought he weighed about 600 pounds, and he was massive. He was built. He was. You could tell he was the leader of the pack. There was no question about it. Okay. He had that Belgian Malinois. The ones I came across in Oklahoma, they all look like Belgian Malinois, except with larger teeth and bigger snouts. But this Bigfoot he wasn't one of the small ones, but he wasn't probably, I'm sure there's people have seen the 9 and the 10 footers. He wasn't that big, right. But I guarantee you that he was at least 800 pounds. When you're talking about an animal that's 8 feet and 800 pounds, I mean, that could destroy a grizzly.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. When it stood there and looked at you, because I don't get a lot of Bigfoot encounters, you know what I mean? Like in that, so I'm going to ask a couple questions. So it's roaring at you. When I picture in my head, I'm picturing this kind of like you imagine a silverback gorilla's face, its mouth opened up. Is there canine teeth? What's the teeth look like? Okay, so when this Bigfoot is standing there after its initial charge, and it's at its second stop, or its first stop, I guess it would be, and it roars at you. When I think of Bigfoot and I think of their facial features, you had described their first experience / man ape like. But when I picture them roaring, I almost see like a silverback gorilla. What are their teeth like? What was its teeth?
No,
like?
it had its the teeth in the front and in the bottom looked to be squared off, but it looked like its incisors were somewhat pointed, right? Not like a Dogman pointed, right? But it looked like they're definitely, more pointed, like they use them for tearing, right? But just so you know, I wanted to go back on something. There were actually like 3 times where we faced off with each other in that little span of time. The first time when he took a few steps towards me after I chambered the round the first time, he took a few steps and then stopped and looked at me, right? That was the first of the 3 standoffs. Then he charged, and then he stopped, and then he screamed, and then I almost dropped the gun, almost shot myself in the head. And then he charged, and then he stopped the second time about 35 yards from me or 40 yards from me in that neighborhood. And that's when I shot him and saw the dust cloud. And then he charged again and got to within, I'd say, 20 yards. And just as I had chambered another round and was bringing it up to fire, he saw what I was going to do and bolted to the right.
Okay.
All
right. So, like, you've seen a silverback gorilla's mouth.
Yes.
Like on TV and in books. Is it similar to that? Similar to that with like the canines? Or is it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's probably not far from what it was.
Or more human-like with bigger incisors.
Yeah, it was like it looked basically, the teeth just looked like big human teeth, except for those incisors, the ones that you would use to like bite into something.
Right.
Like, there's certain people, you've seen people that have the pointy ones that kind of look vampire-ish.
Yeah.
It was just that, but like a little bigger and a lot bigger and a little bit more pointy. But it wasn't like they were Dogman fangs or anything, right? Okay. But it looked like if it bit into you because of the power, it could tear you apart.
Yeah.
The big thing, the difference between these 2 animals, and these are the only 2 animals I've seen, right? I know there's reptilians and what's that other one you always talk about? The crawlers and these other animals. I've never seen any of those. But between these 2 animals, the faster animal, without question, is the Dogman or the werewolf, whatever, based on what Victor says. I get confused on that sometimes, but
right.
The Dogman is much faster. Well, maybe not even much faster. It's faster, but power-wise, dude, it's not even a comparison. If a large male Bigfoot were to fight with a large male Dogman, a Dogman might do some damage as it's getting, as it's coming in towards it. But as soon as that Bigfoot gets a hold of him, he's gonna he has the power to snap him.
Yeah.
It's over, dude. It's there's no, people say, well, which would win? Well, if you're talking about a one-on-one, the Bigfoot's going to win 99 out of 100 times.
Yeah. Like the old
They're
Kong,
just a stronger animal, dude.
Yeah. Like the old Kong black and white when it grabbed a hold of that T-Rex and just with its mouth.
Yeah. These animals are powerful, dude, and they're heavier. They're much heavier. I mean, just the fact of landing, a Bigfoot landing on a Dogman or a human or anything else with the weight that it has, it would crush it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
The only bears, you and I talked about this one time, the only bears that could be in the same league with these animals that we're talking about, not a grizzly. Grizzly's not big enough, not even close. The only bears that these animals might be afraid of would be the Kodiaks.
Yeah.
Because you're talking, some of these animals get up to 1,600 pounds, and when they stand up, there have been Kodiaks that have been 9 foot tall. I mean, these are massive animals with huge claws. They might be able to hold their own against either one of these animals.
Yeah. That's, and you know how big they are. I mean, the freaking Kodiak's head is just enormous. You know?
Oh, dude, it's on my bucket list to kill one of them. I don't know if I'm ever going to get to it, but it's on my. I want to be able to say I killed a Kodiak. It's on my bucket list, and I'm not a hunter. Again, I don't go hunting or anything, but just the thrill of going up to Alaska.
Has there been a hunter that did it with a 357 yet?
There is. If you go and watch some of the videos that are on YouTube, there's a guy on there. He runs like one of those tours. Okay. I think it's called actually I don't remember what it's called, but it's one of the ones where you can watch the videos and he shows you he takes people out to hunt Kodiak, right? Because they're the most feared. Everybody thinks that the polar bear is the most feared. Well, the polar bear is actually taller than a Kodiak, but this guy talks about it in his videos that a Kodiak will bully a polar bear. When a polar bear has a fish or something in its mouth and a Kodiak will come around, it'll drop the food and run because it doesn't want nothing to do with the Kodiak. They're just a very, very aggressive, and they're like a grizzly, because grizzlies are very aggressive. But the difference is a Kodiak can be twice the size of a grizzly.
Yeah. They're just, they're enormous. They're
enormous. And there was a story about a guy that was walking. I just heard this maybe 3 months ago. There was a guy walking in this tall grass. If I remember the story right, he was walking in this tall grass, and it was, because you go up there to hunt these animals in the summertime. It's too cold in the winter, right? And plus they hibernate. So he's walking in this tall grass, and the grass is so tall, he can't really see what's out in front of him. So he pulls his 357 Magnum out. Now, I don't know what 357 Magnum it was. I just know that's what he said it was. I don't know how many rounds he had, but thank God he pulled it out. He thought he was going to come across a snake or something else, right? Maybe a bull that was getting ready to charge because the grass – not a bull, I'm sorry, a moose. Because the grass was that tall, right? So he pulled his handgun out just to have it in case something. But what ends up coming across is he comes across a Kodiak that's crouched down looking at him, right? And as he separates the grass and he comes to it, literally 8 or 9 feet in front of him is a Kodiak.
Jeez, I'm crow.
Oh my God, dude! Can you imagine that? I mean, those animals, and this Kodiak that he ended up killing turned out to be 1,200 pounds.
Wow.
So what happened was he ends up, it was just instinct, right? He didn't have time to really think about what he done. He just brought up the 357, and fortunately for him, the first round hit him directly between the eyes.
Wow. And
it didn't kill him, but it stunned him enough that he was his head was kind of going back and forth, and he could tell he was in trouble. So he literally walked up within 4 feet of him and put the second one in his head and killed it. 2 357 Magnums to the head. That should tell you that some people say that 357 Magnum isn't that potent, but it really is when especially when you're talking in close like that.
Yeah.
It will do the job.
Oh yeah. Definitely a good round. Back to the experience. I think this will be the last question. I wanted to, because you got my curiosity a little bit. Now, when it was doing whatever it was doing and you thought maybe it's digging, maybe it's doing something, I know you and I had talked about, there's a video on YouTube, a kid had caught it, not a kid, about a 20-year-old kid, had caught what looked like a Bigfoot kind of peeling bark off a tree. And it's probably one of the best, clearest videos out there. For some reason, a lot of people don't talk about it.
Was he eating the bark?
It looked like he was kind of eating it or whatever. I know I talked to you about it a while ago. I think it was like when we first met. It looked almost like he was like peeling the bark off. Some people said it was looking for termites or whatever, but I don't foresee that. I don't know what it was doing, but it was standing by this tree, and it looked like it was just peeling the bark off this tree.
This thing really, I don't think it was doing that, because it appeared to me, and again, I never went and looked at what it was doing, but when I first saw it, it looked to me like it was digging in the ground by the tree.
Okay.
Now, I don't know why it was doing the tree knock. I'm assuming that's what it was doing. I never actually saw it do the tree knock. I just heard it. I didn't see it. Maybe there's some other explanation as to what created the sound that caught my attention. But it sounded to me like what I hear people talk about, a tree knock. That's what it sounded like. But there were no other Bigfoot. I didn't see any other. Right. So I'm not sure why he was doing that, unless it had something to do with what he was working on or what his hands were doing in the ground. I don't know if he was hiding something, burying it for later, or maybe he found something he was going to eat. I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's just like you never got a chance to go back, but it's interesting. It kind of piqued my curiosity. So, just I keep envisioning you in that thing just coming up at you, running with its head full charged, arms back, and just the amount of fear, that you must have just...
I tell you, there was... Well, no, the most fear I ever felt in all of my experiences, which I'm not having anymore, because I've been so blessed and fortunate to still be here, but I think out of all, it's funny that you bring that up, because I was thinking about that not too long ago, like which time and which was I the most scared. And I would say the two times the first time for sure was when I was in that little valley on my last experience I had, or encounter I had, when I realized that I was alone in woods with 3 animals and all I had was a bolt-action rifle.
Yeah.
That moment, I felt myself wanting to start to cry. I didn't cry. I wouldn't have let that happen, right? But I felt myself on the verge of breaking out into tears, because I realized, as I thought of my daughters, I was scared, literally scared, to the point where I'm like, okay, well, if this is how I'm going out. And then, of course, my personality, I got mad from that point, and that might have saved my life, because I'm like, well, if I'm going out, you're coming with me.
Right. That's when you started to think and kind of plan a plan of action.
That was probably the most scared. The second time I was most scared, I think, was the moment after I killed, what turned out to be the second one, because we killed one apparently in that first encounter with me and the 2 guys that were with me, but we didn't know we killed one at that time. But that was probably the first time we killed. And the second time, when I killed one on my own with the 40 cal. And I'm telling you this, dude, I still get shivers when I think about it. When I was standing there with Mike, and he had come up behind me, and I turned and I almost shot him in the head. After I had put 2 rounds to finish off the Dogman that was laid up against this log, we heard this howl, and it was closing. I could tell that the howl was getting it howled, and it was like moving while it howled, and when you can't. How do I explain this? The reason I was so scared, Mike just took off running and basically left me there. I mean, he didn't end up leaving me there, but that's what what happened, right? And when he took off, right, I'm standing there alone for a brief second, and I'm thinking to myself, here I am, I've killed one of these things, it's right in front of my feet right now, and I'm hearing several howls, and it's getting closer, and I'm all alone out here. That was probably the second most just because I couldn't see what was coming. I didn't know how many there were. It's almost like when you're faced with one and you know what you got to deal with, it's not as bad as when you don't know. Right.
Yeah. Fear of the unknown,
Yeah. How many are there? Where are they coming from? Are they bigger? Are they smaller?
Exactly. How many are there is, exactly.
Yeah. How many are there? How big are they? Are they in a pack? If it's a pack, I mean, I'm out there with a 40 cal handgun. I mean, if it's a pack, I'm dead.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, so just, when I look back at some of these experiences that I've had, I can't help but think somebody was watching over me. I really believe that, because I know there's going to be a lot of people that are going to say, oh, this guy's full of shit, but I've always said this before, I don't want, and this about me, I don't want any notoriety.
Right.
I mean, if I killed a Bigfoot, then yes, because we're talking about millions of
Well,
dollars.
then you're gonna want to be famous,
Right. You're talking about millions of dollars if that were to happen, right? Or when I killed, if I decided if I could have killed the Dogman that we set out to do, that would have been different because there would have been millions of dollars involved. But when it comes to relates to your show or the other show that I was on, I don't want any notoriety. You know that about me. I don't want to be known. I wouldn't have these stories and just make them up to come on here so that I can say, I'm
you're
on
not gaining
Jeff's show.
anything out of this. You're not gaining anything. It's and one thing you're not gaining. You also have never. None of your experiences have ever differed in the amount of times that I've talked with you. Have they ever, changed even in a remote,
I remember you and I talked about that. I tell people all the time, that's how you can sniff out the bullshit. When you listen to people's stories. Now, I'm not saying there aren't people who have rehearsed it. I'm sure there's been some people who have sounded believable because they rehearsed it for 6 months and then they come on and they may give a lot of detail, but it's all bullshit. But generally speaking, you can tell when somebody's telling you the truth based on the level of the details.
Yeah.
When somebody comes on and they're just giving you a general story, they've got no details. No, I don't know what type of gun it was. Oh, I fired it, or I shot him in the head with a 12 gauge and he just kept coming. Then you're not talking about somebody they're either don't know what they're talking about or they're just lying because they want to get on your show for some reason. Right. I've always told people, listen to the level of detail that I give. I don't sit around and make up Dogman stories or Bigfoot stories. I got a lot going on in my own life that you're well aware of.
Yeah.
So I don't, these things happened, and I'm not saying that I'm better than anybody. I've never said that. I'm no different than anybody else who's listening to this. For whatever reason, according to that guy, it's because of a particular scent that I have.
Pheromone or whatever, right? Yeah.
Yeah, pheromone, scent, whatever they pick up on. Yep. And so, these encounters have happened, and I've listened to almost, I think, every single one of your shows, and 90% of the people that come on your show, you're pretty good about screening them. They're good, but every once in a while a bullshit story comes on, right? And you can tell they just don't have any detail, or when they retell the story, things change.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And if something like this that's this traumatic happens,
you're going to remember every detail like that.
Right.
Yep.
You remember everything.
Yeah. Last question before I let you go, and I know there's going to be someone out there that's thinking this or wanting to ask the question, but Daniel, the angel, or whether it be an angel or some sort of Nordic-like alien or beautiful blonde-haired man that killed the Dogman, what do you think versus that Bigfoot that you were face-to-face with?
I think this... I can't, if I was listening to me, right, if I was listening to Brad, right, yeah, I would say that the most unbelievable story is that one, without question, okay? Somebody once said in one of your comments, it was like a Game of Thrones, maybe not Game of Thrones. They said something like, it sounded like it was from some TV show, which I don't know what the show was because I don't watch TV, but it was some show they were relating the story to, right? The Witcher or something. Was that it? Witcher? Or
I don't know.
Bewitcher? I don't know. Bewitched, right? That was from the 60s. Anyway, I think this particular guy could kill a Bigfoot, kill a Dogman, could kill 30 armed men. I mean, this guy, there was a fluidity to his movement and he showed absolutely, positively no fear of this other animal. None.
Right.
Zero. In fact, he carried himself like he had done it many, many times before.
Yeah.
And I don't, I tell you when we're talking personally that because of my belief system, I do believe that it was an angel. I mean, but the Nordics, as you know, we don't have to get into that, but my opinion is the Nordics are angels. So, and you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I really believe that it was, if you're going to hold my feet to the fire, I believe it was an angel. Is it possible I'm completely stoned and it wasn't? It was just some dude out in the forest. Yes, I've admitted that. It's definitely possible. But how many guys do you come across that are 6'8"
with a broadsword?
Well, it wasn't. I wouldn't call it that, but yeah, I mean, it was a sword. And how many guys that are carrying a sword, right, in the forest that are 6'8", 275 pounds, with perfect blonde Dolph Lundgren from Rocky hair,
right, with
no blemishes on their face, wearing these like kung fu type shoes with these wrappings around their legs? I mean,
that's an angel to me. That's an angel. I picture like an archangel, the protector of humanity and God's weapon of choice would be an archangel. If
I drew up an angel. Now, some people in your comments have said, oh, well, everybody, all the different races, people say, well, angels are what you think they are. They show up. I don't believe that. I think angels are all one particular thing, but that's my opinion. But when I draw up in my own mind what an angel should look like, it's him.
Right.
I mean, he was, I think he could destroy any, creature of the four, Bigfoot, walker, or a crawler, reptilian, whatever. This individual, there was a feeling of absolute command of not only the Dogman, but the environment around him. He's the most impressive person, if you want to call him a person, I have ever been around.
Right.
And he had a sense of humor on top of that.
Yeah.
Which the coolest part about him, which, I believe that day, that Dogman came out to kill me, and he was sent. This is my opinion, right? And if people want to say, oh, you're full of shit, okay, you're entitled to that. Opinions are like assholes and armpits. Everybody has them, and they all stink, right? But if you're gonna put my feet to the fire, I believe that Dogman was out there to kill me and my buddy, probably, and he showed up to intervene.
Yeah.
That's what I believe.
That's what I mean. Just going from the experience, hearing it and hearing you say it and narrating it, that's how I view it.
He never said he was an angel. He never, he did say that one time when I said, what are you? I think I said something like that along those lines. He said, I think you know. Yeah. And I took that to mean like, okay. Another thing he said that I told you that stuck out to me, we've talked about this numerous times, but he said, you guys call them Dogman.
Right, humans. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, he said, you guys, he said, I think you guys call him Dogman. And I said, oh, well, what do you guys call him? And I said that like with an attitude, right? And he goes, well, we call them hellhounds amongst other things.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Absolutely. Well, I knew someone was going to ask, and I just figured I'd ask it. It's probably going to go through someone's head. But I really want to thank you a lot for coming back and sharing your Bigfoot experience.
Just for the audience members who are getting sick of me, I was telling Jeff this when we were doing the pre-interview. I've got no more stories. There's no other stories. Jeff wanted these ones. This was Jeff's idea. I didn't volunteer this. Jeff wanted these stories, and I was glad to do it because Jeff's a good friend of mine. But he wanted these stories, and I understand why he wanted them. They're funny and good stories, but I don't have any other encounters. There's nothing else. 2 years from now, Brad saw a reptilian. No, not going to happen because I'm not going in the forest anymore. So everything that's ever happened to me, your audience now knows. There's nothing left in the closet.
All right, brother. Well, I appreciate you coming back on. Thank you for sharing the first Bigfoot experience with us, as well as the second. But when you told me that one, I was like, people have got to hear this one out of your mouth. I know it had been shared somewhere else, and it was narrated, but I was like, they've got to hear it out of Brad's mouth, because just the way you want to be famous, when you told me that, I laughed because I was like, wow, that's typical fashion right there. So.
Yeah, that's quintessential Brad. I know. I agree, brother. And I want to say, before you let me go, I want to say thanks to your audience for listening and coming to listen. And I appreciate everybody's comments. Most of the comments, not all, but most of the comments have always been good to me, and your audience and your subscribers have always treated me well. So I may come back on the show if Jeff and I ever do what we want to do, or if he wants to do a greatest hits one time or something, I may come on for that. But as far as any new encounters, it's not going to happen. I don't have anything left in the closet, as I said, and I'm not going out to experience anymore. So absolutely. I can tell you, you guys have heard my last experience as far as I'm concerned. All
right. Well, it was great having you back. Thank you again, and stay safe.
Thanks again. I appreciate it, Jeff. Have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.
And there you have it, folks. I hope you all enjoyed this upload as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you for supporting the channel. It is your support, after all, that keeps the channel growing and going, and what gives us all a place and a chance to share our experiences and theories judgment-free. Everyone is simply treated with the respect that we deserve. Please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and our friends. These creatures are real. These events have happened. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless you all.